most prosperous cities in the world.
The increase in gambir and pepper plantations brought many Chinese cultivators, traders, and laborers to Singapore. Most of them had to borrow money for their passage over and had to work for years to pay off their debts.
Chinatown is actually a shade and shelter for the early immigrants. They came here facing a lot of hardship. So the conditions which they found themselves, they had to get used to it. For example, in the coolie houses, it was very congested. Sometimes many of these coolie houses were run along the basis of a few hundred people living in a small cubicle. It's not just a few people living in a room.
Behind me is one of the original coolie houses. Now, these spaces were actually licensed to hold up to 200 of these men. They're just cramped holding pens where the men were treated like beasts of burden. Now, I really want to find out more about these places, and I know just the person to ask.
Geraldine Low was brought up in Singapore and remembers the old shop houses.
Well, I can remember actually walking down this very street because Pagoda Street was where all the tailor shops were, and they were usually on the ground floor, and there was always a funny smell. And I didn't realize that it was actually opium sort of wafting down maybe until later. But there was so much humanity in the street. You know, it was so hot inside that everyone stayed outside on the street and sitting around, even small kids, until 10 o'clock at night, until they really wanted to sleep.
And I noticed that, you know, the conditions of these coolie houses was really very dire.
Well, they were very basic. I mean, what we could see was the front of the room. It was set up with bunks, 2 or 3 on top of each other. This particular one was full of old men, so they were all single men who perhaps, you know, worked as a rickshaw, a trishaw rider, or they worked for the night soil collection, various jobs that they do during the day. Whenever you passed by, there were people sleeping in the bunks. So there was those that worked during the day would sleep at night, and those who worked in the night slept in the day.
Between 1821 and 1945, about 3 million contract laborers were shipped out of China. The abolition of slavery caused a shortage of labor, and the coolie trade was introduced. Unlike the Chinese, who emigrated voluntarily, these coolies were press-ganged into ships. They were transported to slave plantations in Fiji, the Caribbean islands, Mauritius, Hawaii, and the Spanish-speaking countries of Latin America. Our journey takes us to Peru, where a harsh fate awaits Chinese laborers in the mid-19th century. Peru has a great cultural diversity. Known as the land of the Incas, Peruvian civilization spans thousands of years, and its ruins still remain. In the largest cities, the legacy of the conquistadors and colonial architecture are on display everywhere. Following the example of planters in the West Indies, Mauritius, and Cuba, Peruvians turned to the importation of Chinese coolies for their guano and sugar enterprises. Dr. Cheng explains the fate of these Chinese settlers in Peru.
The coolies in China were contracted to work in Peru, and they were given the illusion that after the 8 years they were going to work in Peru, they would have enough money to live far better than in China, and they came with contracts to work for about equivalent to $8 a month, of which 4 were subtracted to pay for the sea fare. The labor conditions of the coolies in Peru were appalling, and when they infringed any of the arbitrary rules, they were punished severely. And when they escaped, they were captured, they were branded and put in chains. Nevertheless, they remained and finished their contracts and obtained their liberty and stay in the country as businessmen. After 1874, there were other waves of Chinese that came as free agents. Some of them were friends or relatives of the coolies. Others had heard of Peru and the land of opportunity. Today, the population is about 10 to 15% of the total population of the country.
The heart of the Chinese community is in Lima's bustling Chinatown. It is most celebrated for its chifas, Chinese restaurants that fuse Asian and Peruvian cuisine.
In Lima, chifa food is the best. I eat it once a week, at least.
Chinese food here in Peru is very different. It's a great mix. I love it.
Classic Asian ingredients such as ginger, soy sauce, and rice are mixed with Peruvian ingredients. Dante Casahuaman is the head chef of one of the district's famous restaurants, the Sunjoy Lao restaurant. He's put an Asian spin on a traditional Peruvian dish, guinea pig.
We are really the only example in the world where the integration of the Chinese into Peruvian society, which has been going on for 150 years, has been made through the medium of gastronomy. It works so well exactly because the 5 Chinese flavors and the 5 Peruvian flavors are vehicles of integration for the Chinese in Peru. Chi Hao Ki is crispy guinea pig, accompanied by a hot sauce made from the madre chili sauce of China and combined with the spices of Peru.
It's guinea pig. It's extraordinary. It's delicious.
I love it. I've tried cuy before, but not this style in which the skin is so crunchy.
I think the mixture, cuy with Chinese food, is very good.
5 generations on, Chinese Peruvians are prominent in business, politics, and arts. Part Chinese, part Peruvian, Sumi Cujon is one of Peru's most successful fashion designers and takes her inspiration from the fusion of her 2 cultures.
My grandfather came to Peru from China in the early 20s. My father was born here. I decided being a fashion designer when my father took me to China. I feel really amazing with all the fabrics that I found there. Chinese heritage brings me the structures, the lines, and Peruvian culture inspires me the details, the motif. I feel really comfortable because I'm part of both cultures. I use silk, fabric, and alpaca fabric. It's an eclectic mix, but I like it. People who buy my clothes are risky people. They have modern style life, and they love originality in design.
Our next destination takes Justine Shapiro to one of the most vibrant Chinatowns on the planet, San Francisco. San Francisco became the international magnet for the 1960s hippies. Its Golden Gate Bridge is possibly the most famous in the world. The city has an abundance of traditional architecture and many different neighborhoods, each with a distinct identity. The biggest community here are the Chinese.
Hey, this all didn't just come out of nowhere. So why did the Chinese come to California in the first place? Well, you could kind of say they came to follow the yellow brick road.
In the mid-19th century, gold brought many Chinese over to California. Unlike the press gang coolies, they were free settlers. But they too were escaping a corrupt dynasty, famine, and peasant rebellions, which made conditions in their home country unbearable.
On January 24th, 1848, carpenter James Marshall discovered gold by accident, sparking one of the largest human migrations in history and transforming California from a rural, pastoral environment to a land of opportunity.
Justine meets up with Ed Ellen at the Marshall Gold Discovery State Historic Park to find out more about these Chinese fortune seekers.
Justine, this is a replica of the original sawmill. Now, Marshall discovered gold while building the sawmill back in January 24th, 1848. That event literally changed